everybody. If you're wondering about the clothes and the makeup and everything, it's just that I have a costume party a little bit later. But I wanted to keep going, so we have The Count of Monte Cristo, Chapter 51, The Report from Janina. Franz left Notier's room so distraught that even Valentine felt pity for him. Villefort only muttered some incoherent words and took refuge in his study. 2 hours later, he received the following letter. After all that has been disclosed this morning, Monsieur Notier de Villefort will appreciate the impossibility of an alliance between his family and that of Monsieur Franz d'Épinay. Monsieur Franz d'Épinay is sorry to think that Monsieur de Villefort, who appeared to be cognizant of the incidents related, should not have anticipated him in the expression of this view. This outspoken letter from a young man who had always shown so much respect towards him was a deadly blow to the pride of a man like Villefort. He had not been in his study long when his wife entered. The fact that Franz had been called away by Monsieur Notier at such a moment had caused so much amazement that Madame de Villefort's position, left alone with the lawyer and the witnesses, had become most embarrassing. At length she determined to stay no longer, and she too took her leave, saying she was going to make inquiries as to the cause of the interruption. Monsieur de Villefort merely told her that as a result of an explanation between Monsieur Notier, Monsieur d'Épinay, and himself, Valentine's engagement was broken off. This was a very awkward answer to have to give to those waiting her return, so she contented herself with saying that Monsieur Notier had been taken with a slight fit of apoplexy at the beginning of their discussion, in consequence of which the signing of the contract would be postponed for a few days. This news, false though it was, came so singularly in the train of the two similar misfortunes that her auditors looked at each other in amazement and withdrew without saying a word. In the meantime, Valentine, happy though at the same time terrified at all she had heard, embraced the feeble man in loving gratitude for having broken a tie she had considered indissoluble, and asked his permission to go to her room for a while to recover her composure. Instead of going to her room, however, Valentine went to the garden. Maximilian was waiting in his customary place, ready for any emergency, and convinced that Valentine would run to him the first moment she was free to do so. He was not mistaken. With his eyes glued to the cracks in the palings, he saw her running toward him and throwing her usual precaution to the winds. The first word she uttered filled his heart with joy. "Saved!" she cried. "Saved!" repeated Morrel, unable to believe such happiness. "Who has saved us?" "My grandfather. You should really love him, Morrel." Morrel swore to love him with his whole heart. The oath cost him nothing, for at that moment he felt it was not sufficient to love him as a father or a friend. He almost adored him as a god. "How did he manage it?" he asked. "What means did he use?" Valentine was about to recount everything when she remembered that at the root of all was a secret which did not belong wholly to her grandfather. "I will tell you about it all later," she said. "When?" "When I am your wife." The turn the conversation was taking was so pleasing to Morrel that he was quite content to leave the matter at that and be satisfied with the one all-important piece of news for the day. He would not leave her, however, till she had given her promise that she would see him the next evening. This Valentine was ready to do. Her outlook had undergone a complete change, and it was certainly less difficult for her now to believe that she would marry Maximilian than it was for her to believe an hour back that she would not marry Franz. In the meantime, Madame de Villefort went up to Notier's room, where she was received with the habitual cold and forbidding look. "There is no need to tell you, monsieur," said she, "that Valentine's engagement is broken off, since it is here that the rupture took place. But what you do not know is that I have always been opposed to this marriage, and that it was being contracted against my will." Notier looked at his daughter-in-law as though demanding an explanation. "Now that this marriage, which I know did not meet with your approval, has been stopped, I have come to speak to you of something which neither Monsieur de Villefort nor Valentine could mention." Notier's eyes bade her to proceed. "As the only one disinterested, and therefore the only one who has the right to speak on the matter," she continued, "I come to ask you to restore not your love, for that she has always had, but your fortune to your grandchild." For an instant, Notier's eyes hesitated. Evidently, he was trying to find a motive for this request, but was unable to do so. "May I hope, monsieur," said Madame de Villefort, "that your intentions coincide with my request?" "Yes," Notier signaled. In that case, I leave you a grateful and happy woman, monsieur, she said, and bowing to Notier, she withdrew. True to his word, Monsieur Notier sent for the notary the next day. The first will was torn up and a new one made, in which he left the whole of his fortune to Valentine, on condition that she should not separate herself from him. It was then noised abroad that Mademoiselle de Villefort, the heiress of the Marquis and Marquise de Saint-Méran, had been restored to her grandfather's good graces, and that one day she would have an income of over 300,000 francs. While the events recorded above were taking place in the house of Monsieur de Villefort, the Count of Monte had received Monte Cristo's visit, ordered his carriage, and driven to Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin. Danglars was making his monthly balance, and it was certainly not the best time for him to find him in a good humor. As a matter of fact, it had not been so for the past few months. On seeing his old friend, he assumed his most commanding air and seated himself squarely in his chair. Monte, on the other hand, laid aside his habitual stiffness of manner and was almost jovial and affable. Feeling sure that his overtures would be well received, he lost no time in coming to the point. "Well, here I am, Baron. We have made no headway in our plans since our former conversation." "What plans, Count?" Danglars asked, as though vainly trying to discover some explanation of the general's words. "Since you are such a stickler, my dear Baron, and since you desire to remind me that the ceremony is to be carried out in all due form, I will comply with your wishes." With a forced smile, he rose, made a deep bow to Danglars, and said, "I have the honor, Baron, to ask the hand of Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars, your daughter, for my son, the Vicomte Albert de Monte." But instead of welcoming these words, as Monte had every right to expect, Danglars knit his brows, and, without even inviting the Count to take a seat, replied, "Before giving you an answer, Count, I must think the matter over." "Think the matter over?" exclaimed Monte, more and more astonished. "Have you not had time enough for reflection during the 8 years that have elapsed since we first spoke of this marriage?" "Every day things happen, Count, which call for reconsideration of questions which we believe to be exhaustively considered," was Danglars' reply. "What do you mean?" asked Monte. "I do not understand you." "What I mean is that during the last fortnight, unforeseen circumstances—" "Excuse me, but is this a play we are acting?" "A play?" "Yes." "Pray let us be more explicit." "I should be delighted." "Have you seen the Count of Monte Cristo lately?" "I see him very often. He is a friend of mine." "When you saw him the other day, did you not tell him that I appeared to you to be irresolute and forgetful in regard to this marriage? You see that I am neither the one nor the other, since I have come to bid you keep your promise." Danglars made no reply. "Have you changed your mind so soon?" continued Monte. "Or have you but egged me on to this proposal in order to see me humiliated?" Danglars understood that if he continued the conversation in the same strain as that in which he had begun it, he might be taken at a disadvantage. So he said, "I quite comprehend that you are amazed at my reserve, Count. Believe me, I am the first one to regret that painful circumstances compel me to act thus." "These are but so many empty words," replied the Count. "They might perhaps satisfy an ordinary man, but not the Count of Monte. When a man of his position comes to another man to remind him of his plighted word, and that man breaks his word, he is at least justified in demanding from him a good reason for his conduct." Danglars was a coward, but did not wish to appear one. Besides, he was annoyed at the tone Monte had adopted. "I do not break my word without good reason," he retorted. "What do you mean by that?" "That my reason is good enough, but it is not an easy one to tell. You must understand, however, that I cannot be put off by such cryptic remarks. In any case, it is quite clear that you reject my proposal." "Not altogether," replied Danglars. "I merely suspend my decision. But surely you do not presume to think that I am going to submit to your whims and wait patiently and humbly until such a time as I shall be restored to your favor again? Then, Count, if you will not wait, we must consider our plan as null and void." The Count bit his lips till they bled in his effort to suppress the outburst which was so natural to his proud and irritable temper. He realized, however, that in this case a scene would only make him look ridiculous, and had reached the door when he changed his mind and turned back. A cloud had gathered on his brow, which showed that his pride had given way to uneasiness. "Come now, my dear Danglars," said he, "we have known each other for many long years, and should, therefore, have some consideration for one another. You owe me an explanation, and the least you can do is inform me what unfortunate occurrence has deprived my son of your favor. I bear the Viscount personally no ill will, that is all I can tell you, monsieur, replied Danglars, adopting his insolent attitude once more now that the Count had become calmer. Then against whom is your ill will directed? Asked Moncouf, his uneasiness showing itself in his changed voice and pale face. Danglars did not let any of these symptoms escape him, and fixing a look of greater assurance on the Count than was his wont, he said, "You may be thankful I do not give a more detailed explanation." A nervous trembling caused by repressed anger shook Marcoff's whole frame, but pulling himself together with a violent effort, he said, "I have the right to insist on an explanation. Have you anything against Madame de Moncouf? Is my fortune too small for you? Is it because my opinions differ from yours?" "Nothing of the kind, monsieur," said Danglars. "If it were so, I should be at fault, for I was fully informed on these matters at the time of the engagement. Seek no more for a reason, I pray. I am really quite ashamed to see you indulging in self-examination. Let us leave the matter as it stands and agree to a postponement. Surely, monsieur, there is no hurry. My daughter is but 17 and your son 21. In the meanwhile, time follows its course, carrying events with it. What is obscure one evening is often revealed the next, and the vilest calumnies oftentimes die in one day." "Calumnies, did you say?" exclaimed Marcof, turning livid. "Can anyone be slandering me?" "As I already said, monsieur, we will not go into details. I assure you this is more painful for me than for you, for I had reckoned on the honor of alliance with you, and the breaking off of a marriage proposal always injures the lady more than the gentleman." "Enough, monsieur, we will drop the subject," said Marcof, as, crumpling his gloves up in his rage, he left the room. Danglars noticed that not once had Moncouf dared to ask whether it was on his own account that he, Danglars, had broken his word. That same evening the banker had a long conference with several friends, and Monsieur Cavalcanti, who had remained in the salon with the ladies, was the last to leave the house. As soon as he awoke the next morning, Danglars asked for the newspapers. He flung 3 or 4 on one side till he came to the Impartial, of which Beauchamp was the chief editor. He nastily tore off the wrapper and opened it nervously. Disdainfully passing over the leading article, he came to a miscellaneous news column and, with a malicious smile, stopped at a paragraph which read as follows. "A correspondent at Janina writes, 'A fact hitherto unknown, or at any rate unpublished, has just come to my knowledge. The castles defending this town were given up to the Turks by a French officer in whom the Vizier Ali de Belen had placed entire confidence. This French officer, who was in the service of Ali, Pasha of Janina, and who not only surrendered the castle of Janina, but also sold his benefactor to the Turks, at that time was called Fernand. But he has since added to his Christian name a title of nobility and a family name. He is now styled the Count of Moncouf and ranks among the peers." "Good," Danglars observed after having read the paragraph. "Here is a nice little article on Colonel Fernand, which will, methinks, relieve me of the necessity of giving any explanation to the Count of Moncouf." So, broken engagements, rendezvous, and secrets come to light. Let's see what happens next. I'll see you next time.